And we're broadcasting in 3, 2, 1.
The hair's okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Entrepreneurship World Cup workshops. We're really, really happy to have you here today. We'll wait a few seconds for a few more people to join us. As we mentioned last week, one of the very cool updates is we have the first group of global pool countries announced. So you can check on the platform. You can look at the discussion board. There's a lot of different places where you can see if your country is among the top 52 that have been decided as part of the initial global pool competitors. So check that, because it means that you'll want to go on the EWC Accelerate platform to see what additional pieces you have to do in the next few weeks. Anyway, I'm Dr. Susan Amott. We are thrilled to have you here for another EWC workshop. This week, we have a very special guest. Patrick McGinnis, while he was in his studies at Harvard Business School years ago, came up with the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. And that's probably why most of you are here today, fear of missing out on great information to help your businesses. So in addition to being the inventor of this concept, he's really taken it to heart as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and author. He's shared with the world great ways that we can think about how FOMO can help us or hurt us. And most importantly, I think it all comes back to great decision making. And so he actually has a very successful TED Talk, which we'll share that link with you as well today, on great decision making and how you can be a better decision maker. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Patrick McGinnis, who's going to walk us through some of his learnings and best practices. We'll close it out with Q&A and answer whatever EWC related questions you have at the end. So welcome, Patrick. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here. So first of all, I want to say hello to everybody. And I know we have a very international crowd, which I love. For those of you who don't know me, a couple of things you should probably know is, number one, I've been to 103 countries. So no matter where you are, and I'd be curious if there's anybody whose country I haven't been to, you have to put in the comments, but I've been kind of everywhere. So I love talking to people from all over the world. And also, I started my career as a venture capitalist in Latin America. I lived in Argentina and Brazil and in Mexico. And then I went on to invest all over the world. So I've done investments in Pakistan and in Turkey and in China. And I'm also currently on the investment committee of a new venture capital fund based in Peru. That's called Salcantay Exponential Fund, or SXF. So we're looking at investments in Latin America these days. So in fact, I'm going to be in Lima virtually right after this. So that's just a little bit on me. And what I want to do today, how I want to spend our time together is, number one, I want to sort of share with you my contacts, because I am here for you. So if you want to be in touch in the future, all of these are great ways to keep in touch with me. Now, I know everybody's a little different in what they like to do. So let me just quickly tell you, you can find me on Instagram, where we share a lot of great content, also fun sort of content as well. And by the way, I learned how to cook during the pandemic. So if you want to see what a great cook I am, go to Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I've been writing a really great newsletter you can subscribe to that is, I think, really relevant to this time, talking about how to run a business in a time of uncertainty. I have a Facebook group. I'm on Twitter sharing all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, that's really everything you can imagine. Then obviously there's the book, which is out on Amazon. It's also, you can get it digitally. And finally, I have a podcast called FOMO Sapiens, which is distributed by Harvard Business Review. And the show has really taken off, actually, and it's kind of in the top 50 in the US, and it's all over the world. And we talk about entrepreneurship, and we have all kinds of diverse founders on, and we talk about changing our businesses and pivoting in the pandemic, but we also just talk about building businesses in general and also how to be more productive. So it's a show that I think everybody here can enjoy. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and that's how to find me. So I'll put this up at the end and we'll send this stuff out, but please connect. I love hearing from you, and I actually do answer everything. Maybe it takes me a few days sometimes, but I always answer. Okay. So what we're going to do is talk about today is explain the history of FOMO, explain what FOMO is, talk about another related term that didn't get famous yet. Then we're going to talk about how to address each of these things in your life in order to live more decisively, not just in your business life, which is a really important part of my message, but also kind of in general. And so that's the topic today. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I invite you to put your comments, your questions in the chat, because there's nothing more interesting for me than learning what is interesting to you and hearing what you have to say, hearing what you disagree with. If you disagree with me, we want to hear about it. And I'll be happy to talk about that. So please, let's make this interactive, and then it'll be way more interesting for everybody. All right, let's get going. I want to start with a history of FOMO. So one thing that's cool about FOMO is that, I always thought it was kind of this American thing, but as I travel the world, I found that almost everywhere I go, people know what FOMO is. And in fact, the only two places I found that didn't know about FOMO, at least where I was, were in Eastern Ethiopia and in Turkmenistan. So basically everybody else in the world is talking about FOMO. Okay. So where does FOMO come from? Fear of missing out. You've heard of it. It's a hashtag. Where does it come from? Well, just like there was a first Homo sapiens, there was a first FOMO sapiens, and that is little me. I think I'm probably like 5 years old there. And I'm in my little sort of hometown in the state of Maine in the United States, which is a place where there isn't a lot of FOMO. In fact, I call my father the man who knew no FOMO, because literally people kind of just, they don't do a lot. It's a very simple life. It's a very nice life. But it's funny, I asked my father what's changed for him during the pandemic, and he said, well, really nothing. So that just tells you how chill everybody is up there. And so I grew up there. I didn't have a lot of FOMO. But then when I was about 26 years old, I went to Harvard Business School, or the home of FOMO. And you can see there the types of FOMO inducing activities that I was partaking in. Now let's paint a picture. I want to give you a sense of what the world looked like at that time. So there was no social media. In fact, while I was, sitting there with all my friends drinking out of large bowls of whatever that is, Mark Zuckerberg was just down the street inventing the first version of Facebook. And in fact, Mark Zuckerberg actually rented a friend of mine's apartment for a couple of months, and he didn't clean it at the end, and she got in a fight with him and never gave him back his deposit money. Too bad she hadn't taken stock in his startup, Facebook. But anyway, here we were. And even though we didn't have sort of social media, and in fact, text messaging was just in its infancy, it didn't matter, because living at HBS in student apartments on campus was like living inside of all of these social networks. And we lived in what I like to refer to as a choice-rich environment. We were overwhelmed with opportunities, whether it was classes or jobs or trips or experiences. It was all consuming. And I was particularly sort of prone to want to do everything all the time. In fact, I basically didn't sleep for 2 years. I was constantly exhausted, and I had this stress around missing out on stuff. I just was so afraid I'd miss out on something that I started to call it fear of missing out. I shortened that to FOMO, and I wrote an article in our school newspaper, which was in the humor section, because we all thought it was kind of funny. It was like, oh, this is a crazy place, and isn't this funny, our FOMO? But, we'll all graduate and go back and get jobs, and we'll forget about this crazy life that we lived. But in fact, that is not what happened. What happened was the rest of the world caught up with us. So when the internet came and everybody had social media, and they could suddenly compare themselves to other people and see what they were missing, no matter where they were in the world, everybody else started to feel these same feelings. And now 15 years later, FOMO is in the dictionary, not just the ones that you've heard of as the classical dictionaries, but in the most important dictionary of all, the Urban Dictionary. That's where everything happens these days, right? And it's not just some sort of American phenomenon, but no, it's gone all over the world. And it's been incredible. Just as my book just came out, and we've just sold rights in Indonesian and Italian, and it's in Chinese, and it's going to be in Serbian. I mean, all these interesting kind of exciting places, that Russian, where people are going to be able to enjoy it, Spanish. So that's kind of a wild and unpredictable thing. And in fact, I didn't actually know this was happening. While all this was happening and FOMO was becoming a thing throughout the world, I was not paying attention. I was working all the time in private equity. And then one day I got a call from a reporter who said, I'm writing an article about the history of FOMO, and I've traced it back to you. And he wrote an article about me, and it went viral. And here we are today. So it's kind of an unbelievable story. And the lesson, entrepreneurs, for you, and this is super important, if there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that when you create quality content, or maybe not even that high quality, but I thought it was pretty good. When you create content and you put it into the world, you never know where it's going to go. Okay. So create things, put them out there, and you may see that in the future, there are opportunities that come out of it. Obviously, you want to be nice, though. You don't want to, some things can come back and get you in the bad way too. So make sure you just do nice things on the internet. All right. So as I mentioned, this article about FOMO was in the, it was in the humor section of the newspaper. And in fact, a lot of people think of FOMO as something that's funny. It's something we tweet about, or we make viral videos about, or it's in memes and ads, and it's always something jokey. The reality is FOMO is serious. It has major implications for your mental health, for your productivity, and your finances. And it's something that is important to be dealt with, because it can cause us to spend money on things we don't really need, to waste time looking at the news or social media. It can cause us depression. It causes us to feel insecure or to compare ourselves with others and feel bad about ourselves. So there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done. There are academic studies and journals that show the implications of FOMO. And it's not a laughing matter. It's something we need to take seriously. And then when it comes to running our businesses, we can make decisions based on the wrong reasons, because we want to keep up with that competitor, or because somebody told us that we have to do something, or we're going to miss out, that we have to be in this market, or we have to open this particular new product to the world. And if we do that for the wrong reasons, it can be incredibly damaging to our businesses. Now, I just want to quickly note that FOMO has survived the coronavirus. Okay, in my opinion, when we saw the beginning of this crisis, we all went panic buying for toilet paper. And then we had certain people who didn't want to socially distance, and we still do, by the way. And then all of us were so addicted to our news, we didn't want to miss out on what was happening. Funny enough, some people thought that FOMO was dead. And in fact, I saw early on in the crisis, people saying on Twitter, well, I guess FOMO is dead now. And for a little while, I definitely thought it might be, because we all left our the outside world. We closed the doors, and we started doing all those things we've been meaning to do for years, to read those books and watch those movies and cook and talk to our friends that we hadn't talked to in a long time. And it felt really good, and the pressure was off. There was nothing to miss out on. But here's the thing. FOMO has survived the coronavirus, and that's according to the New York Times. And let me tell you why. Okay. Remember those big plans you had? All the things you wanted to do during quarantine. And I thought, by the way, I thought quarantine was going to be like 3 weeks. Okay. Now I'm in week, I don't know, 9 or something. I've lost count. I had a big pile of things I do. And I've done some of them, but other things I have not done. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you. Pre-COVID, that was my phone usage. Okay. Post-COVID, it's doubled. Spending over 12 hours a day on screens. Now, I'd love to think all of that is productive. The amount of time that I waste on things that don't really matter, much higher than I would like to admit. We all do that. Why is that? Because even though we are locked in our houses, the thing that provokes our FOMO, which is the internet and social media, we're using it now more than ever. And so, in fact, I would argue FOMO was worse than ever before. And when we're allowed to go outside again, we're all going to go crazy. Okay. Now, it's sad but true. So that's why we've got to learn to keep calm and say no to FOMO. And it's particularly important right now, because if you had goals and objectives that were important to you, that you wanted to keep with you and achieve during this period of time, it's time now to recalibrate. Use the rest of the time to do things that you want to do and not get stuck doing things that are not serving you. And so in order to deal with our FOMO, I want to explain what it is. I want to explain the other foe, and then we'll get into solutions. Okay. So let's start with, what is FOMO? FOMO is 2 things. Number one, it has an aspirational element. Okay. So it's this idea that we think that there is something better out there than what we're doing right now. And that's based on a perception that something's happened, oftentimes something that we see on social media, especially these days, right? Now, the important thing to note here is that the word perception is highlighted. Why is that perception? Because we really don't know. We have no way to know if something's better. See that beautiful images on the left? It's a very popular spot in Russia where people take pictures for Instagram. It looks pretty nice, right? I've not been there. I've never been there myself, but my perception is that it's amazing and it's a lot better than being inside my house right now. So that's a really big part of it, is that there's an information asymmetry. And because we have no way of being able to actually know if it's as good as it looks, we fill in the details with our heads, and that causes us to feel stress because we want to be there. Now that's the first part. Number two is the herd. So the second part of FOMO is our fear of being omitted or excluded from a positive or memorable collective experience. So everybody's doing something and I'm not, right? Everybody's getting the new iPhone and I'm not. So that's why I wait in the line. And by the way, I've been this guy so many times waiting on the line for the new iPhone. I could have bought it online, but I just had to be part of this experience. I mean, it's incredible. And so there is a steep element of wanting to be part of the crowd. And this is actually something that is part of our evolutionary biology. If you think back to the earliest humans, they were structured in groups and they stayed together because if you were kicked out of the group or somehow got separated from the group, you may not have the information you need to find the food that you need, to find the shelter that you need, all the things you need to survive and thrive in the survival of the fittest. And in fact, it's not unique to human beings. If you look at the wildebeest in Africa, if anybody's ever had a chance to go check out the migration of the wildebeest, what's so striking about it is you have millions of animals and they're all running together in a group and a herd, just like that, because they are following something called a swarm formation, so that they can't be picked off. Right? It's like if you had them all separate, a bunch of predators could kill them off one by one. When it's a swarm, basically maybe you'll get a couple on the side, but the group survives. And that is exactly how we are wired. But the reality is that we don't need to be part of a swarm or a herd. In fact, many of the great leaders that we know in the business, political, or social worlds are people who did something different. And so therefore, being part of the herd, especially if we haven't consciously chosen to be part of the herd, is problematic. And that's what drives FOMO. Now that we understand FOMO, you might remember earlier on the slide, I showed you that article I wrote way back in business school, 2004, about this thing I called FOMO. But there was another foe. If you look at the title of this article, it says Social Theory at HBS McGinnis's Two Foes. Okay, so there's another foe. And that foe never got famous, never got in the dictionary, at least not yet. But I came up with it at the same time, and I've always thought it is actually much more damaging. And it's called FOBO. And FOBO stands for fear of a better option, fear of a better option. And what that is in our desire to have the best, we are afraid to choose something lest something better come along. So it's really about maximization. We want to hold out for as long as possible based on the perception that there's something better out there for us. But again, it's perception. We don't actually know. We don't have perfect information. There's an information asymmetry. That doesn't matter because in our heads, we're inventing the story about how if I just keep looking, I'll find something better. Now, the second element of FOBO is option value. When you think like that, you also think that holding back, making a decision and having as many options as possible and as much flexibility as possible is actually the best thing you can do. You're afraid that if you choose one thing, you will not be able to sort of reverse course and maybe go back to something else, right? Because when you choose one thing, you got to move on. And oftentimes you lose your other options. And so that's what happens when you have FOBO. You're not willing to decide. You're not willing to make a choice. And as a result, FOBO breeds paralysis. And there's a big problem with FOBO because people who have FOBO can't build new things. So they can't be great entrepreneurs. People who have FOBO can't be leaders. You never hear about somebody saying, you know what I like about Nelson Mandela? So much FOBO. What a great leader. Of course not. Leaders are decisive, right? And so that's a really important part of what FOBO is about. And I want to give you an example about how this plays out in the world of business. So Audi the car company, was one of the first car companies to decide that it wanted to come up with an electronic vehicle. In 2009, they announced, you know what, we're coming out with this electronic vehicle. Then in 2010, they came out with a different model, a concept car that they put out there, like an MVP. Then in 2012, totally different MVP, totally different strategy, totally different design. Okay, fine. 2015, totally different strategy, design. They changed it again. And then finally in 2018, they managed to put a product to market. Now, what happened there? Well, there was a great article in Wired in 2011 that tells you what happened. Analysis paralysis, FOBO. And in fact, a company that has the motto Vorsprung durch Technik, which means advancement through technology, and which has a 5 billion euro a year R&D budget, got so caught up in its own FOBO, delaying, waiting for that next meeting, waiting for that next board meeting, waiting for that next study or test, that it never managed to put anything on the market. And listen, we all know it's important to put good products out there, but the problem is, this is why big companies lose new markets to startups, because while Audi is trying a million different things and never committing to everything, you have Elon Musk, who comes out with a pure play Tesla, launches in 2013, and by 2020, even though his company produces fewer units, he's now worth more than Audi. And so you see Audi has been stagnated basically in the period of time. They basically declined in value while Tesla increased in value 50x. And that's what happens over and over again. It happened with music when all these new solutions in the digital music scene came and traditional industry couldn't respond. Happened in publishing, it happened in retail. It's going to happen in so many other industries, telemedicine, all these areas. And so the great thing about startups is that they can't have FOBO, right? Because when you have limited time and money, you can't do what these big businesses, you can't delay decision making. You have to move forward. You have to make decisions. Otherwise, you'll go nowhere. And so that is a really the fundamental sort of nature of FOBO when you think about the business world. Now, I want to get into some of these strategies around how to defeat the foes, okay? Because that's where we want to get to. This is why y'all came here today, to figure out how to beat the foes. So let's get into it. Where do you want to get? What's your goal? Your goal is to find the power to choose what you actually want and the courage to miss out on the rest. Let's think about that I just want to dwell on that, because this is, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I came up with this, and this is kind of like the motto of my podcast and everything else, is how can we choose what we actually want, right? That's part one. And then miss out on the rest. Because a big part of being successful here isn't just knowing what you want. It's then maintaining that, sticking to it, because there's going to be so many forces that want to distract you. It's going to be the apps and the naysayers and the news reports and all these things that undermine your confidence that you're making the right decision. And you have to learn how to trust yourself, move forward, and then let go of the things you can't have. Because of course, when you choose something, and we all want to be decisive, part of choosing is also is the process of letting go of what you cannot have. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And I want to get into some solutions around this. So let's focus on FOMO first. So as you remember, FOMO is two things. It's this aspiration, that perception that something better out there awaits you. It's also the fear of being excluded from the group or the herd. Okay, so in order to beat FOMO and figure out what we actually want, we've got to go after each one of those one by one. Okay, so as I noted earlier, for both FOMO and FOBO, it's about information asymmetry, right? Like, is this as good as it looks? We got to focus on that. Let's go back to this one. Remember that beautiful lake? Well, look at the headline. That lake that we thought was so gorgeous way back when we were talking about FOMO and perception, turns out it's actually a toxic waste dump. And if you go in the lake, you will die. So perception is deception. And that is a big part of overcoming FOMO when you're looking at things, is asking yourself and doing the work, doing the due diligence. I mean, thinking like an investor, because investors, when they invest in something, they're looking for a return on their money. And when you're making a decision, you're looking for a return on that decision, right? So asking yourself, what do I want? What are my criteria? What's important to me? And then does this offer those things? Can I even do it? Can I afford to do it? Is it possible for me? Like, I want to go to Italy. Well, guess what? There's no way to go. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. I'm not going to waste time on FOMO, excuse me. I want to, oh, I wish I could be a professional basketball player. Well, you know what? I'm 5'7", so I'm not going to waste FOMO on that either. I want to be in 17 markets. Well, I have no venture capital and I have no funding, so that doesn't make sense for me right now. Thinking about what's realistic and then critically thinking about, is this as good as it looks on the surface, is how you determine whether something whether it's perception or deception. So that is the first part of overcoming FOMO. And then I encourage people to write all of this down into an investment memo. Again, a decision is like an investment. Write down your rationale. And what's so helpful is when you write something down, it's very hard to sort of lie to yourself. When you put words on paper, the flaws in your argument are exposed. And you can also show the argument to other people and get their insight and critique and feedback. And then you'll have a record of your thinking so that you can go back later on and then compare what actually happened with what you thought would happen and improve your decision-making skills. So this is always about improving, constant improvement. Okay. And so as you think about how you could apply this to your own life, let's get into the sort of practical applications. All of you are aspiring entrepreneurs or you are entrepreneurs right now. And you are making big decisions, right? So how can you take this and apply it to your decision-making? Should we choose this product or that product? And you can do all of these strategies apply to thinking through some of the big business ideas, as long as they're FOMO related, right? Number two, once we've dealt with this aspirational element of FOMO, we need to move on to the herd aspect. This idea that, everybody's doing it but me. Should I be doing it? Well, here, you want to get into the motivation behind what you're thinking. And here, it's about asking yourself this simple question. Do I actually want to do this, or am I simply following the herd? Is this an internally driven motivation, or am I taking external cues from somebody else? Really critical, because when you are simply trying to do what other people are doing and keeping up with them, but you're not doing it for the right reasons, and it's not coming from in here, from your own sort of core, you have a great chance of messing up. And that's what happens all the time when companies launch businesses that are based on trying to keep up with a competitor, but they don't actually have the ability to do it, and they don't do it for the right reasons. They fail, and consumers know this. And so this is the second part of identifying FOMO. Now, if you do both of these and you still feel like you want to do something, then go for it. Why is that? Why should you feel comfortable if you've done this work? Because when you have FOMO and you're making a decision, you are not making the decision based on its merits. You're making it based on emotion. But if you do all of this work, you've taken the emotion away, you put in facts, and you can allow your intuition to do its natural job. And so if you feel that you should do it, go for it. There is no riskless decision, but of course, you have done enough work to know that you're making a decision based on the right reasoning and not emotion alone. So that's how you beat FOMO. Now, I think if you want to get into the FOMO, and we can talk about that as well, might as well stop here and pause about overcoming FOMO when it comes to important things. So just like FOMO is based on this maximization idea that something better is out there for you all the time based on information asymmetry. And it's also based on this desire to maintain your option value for as long as possible. Now, I'm going to tell you how you deal with this, but I'll encourage you, and I think we'll send out a link, to watch my TED Talk. It's only 7 minutes long, and it explains this entire concept with graphics. It's really beautiful. So you can get all the details in there, but let me just give you a little flavor for it. So you're going to do the same thing as you did with FOMO. You're going to eliminate the information asymmetry to make sure that something is as good as it looks. And, it's that process of due diligence and writing it down and everything. But the interesting thing about FOMO is that, as I mentioned, it's about maximization. But maximization isn't actually the problem. This isn't a problem of wanting the best. It's a problem of process. Lots of people want the best and are decisive. Steve Jobs wanted the best, still made decisions. And so you have to find a way to make decisions and improve your process to do so. And the problem we have when we have FOBO is not that we want the best, but that we're not willing to let go of the other things that we could potentially do. So we want to keep all of our options, but to choose just one thing, you must let go of everything else. And so what you're going to do is engage in a process in which you let go of the things that you cannot have in order to choose the thing that you can have. So let's say that I'm choosing between two things. I've done my research. I know what they're about, but I'm still indifferent. I'm like, I don't know which one to choose. I compare them side to side and I choose the best of the two. Okay. I force myself to choose the best of the two, what I perceive as the best. And it might be minor, but I choose one and I eliminate the other one permanently. Okay. And then I go with that one. Now, why can I feel comfortable? Because you are at a point where either one is completely acceptable. That's what FOBO is. It's when you are choosing among acceptable options, but you're stuck. And so the problem here isn't that one option is better or worse than the other, or that you have no options. The problem is that you are being indecisive. So you have to take yourself out of the decision-making process and allow for yourself to decide something and then move on. And the great news is you'll then come to a whole new set of options. As long as you keep making decisions, you can move forward. But you need to exit this place where you keep going back to things without rejecting them, because that is where you have the pathology. That's where you get stuck and where the stress is generated. So again, FOBO isn't like I'm deciding between putting a gun to my head and shooting myself or jumping off a building. No. That's a whole different problem. And that's not what I'm talking about here. If you got those problems, I unfortunately can't help you. FOBO is when you have acceptable decisions and you just can't choose one of them. And in fact, most of the time, we don't have this problem. This is for when you do get stuck. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about FOMO, because it's actually true that FOMO isn't always all bad. And in fact, FOMO can be good for you. I like to think of FOMO a little bit like drinking a glass of wine or two. You drink a glass of wine, maybe you loosen up, you're willing to go out and dance on the dance floor, do something you might not have done, and then you're fine. And you're fine in the morning. If you drink too much wine, you might do something stupid and hurt yourself or hurt others, and you feel terrible later on. So a little bit of FOMO is okay. FOBO, on the other hand, is kind of like smoking cigarettes. Bad for you, bad for all the people around you. There's nothing good that comes out of it. It may feel good in the moment, but has terrible long-term consequences for you and others, the people who are waiting for you to make a decision. And so how is FOMO good for you? How is this little glass of wine good for you? Well, when we have FOMO, we are learning something about ourselves, about our motivations, about where our head is at. If you see somebody starting a business on Facebook and you kind of feel a little FOMO, maybe it means you should explore starting a business. If you see somebody who has made an investment in a company and you think, oh, wow, I wish I was doing that, maybe you should consider doing that. If you see somebody who moved to a new country and you feel that maybe you should move. But the thing about that is, while it's great to then start understanding and connecting with the things we might want to do, here's the part that's really important. You don't just quit your job and move. You don't just quit your job and start a company. You want to make sure that you have done the work to make sure that the FOMO isn't based on what's going on in your head, but you've done the research and the work to actually engage with it and know that it's going to live up to what you want it to live up to. And so that's why I encourage people to do something I call going all in some of the time. And that is doing very focused, trying things out. So for example, say you're thinking about moving to a city, go there for a week, spend time there, rent an Airbnb when you can do that again, and walk around and see, what is this about? If you want to start a business, try an MVP and see if you like it. I mean, I've heard these sad stories of people whose dream it was to open a bakery. They're working at a law firm and all they want to do is open a bakery. And so they quit their job at the law firm and they open a bakery. And it's only once they've opened the thing and it's been open for a few months that they realize that they hate working at a bakery and they hate cooking. It's fun to do on the weekend here and there once in a while, but they never want to do it for full time. And so by going all in some of the time and feeling and experiencing the things that give you FOMO, you can see if they're actually things that are worth your time, your energy, they're worth your FOMO, if you want to do them in a more meaningful way. And one way to think about that, and the way that I sort of think about it is in terms of entrepreneurship. And I wrote this book that came out a couple of years ago called The 10% Entrepreneur. And it's exactly about this. It's about how to engage in entrepreneurship part-time to see if it's interesting to you, and maybe then you can go full-time. And why did I write this book? Because I was afraid of being an entrepreneur. And in fact, I had 5 big fears. Number one, the lifestyle is hard. You work a lot. The money is not great. You are abandoning status. What does that mean? Well, and this is something we see a lot all over the world is, you go to university, you get that first job and everybody's so proud of you. And then if you quit that job to do your own company or your own venture, people will question you. I mean, it's incredible. Your parents will be like, well, I don't understand. Why would you do that? You have a great job at the bank. Why would you want to work for a startup and, make no money and nobody's heard of it? Right? This is something that a lot of entrepreneurs deal with, especially in a global context. You may not have the idea yet. So 80% of entrepreneurs, according to Inc. magazine and the Inc. 500, found their idea while working in a previous job. So you may be meant to be an entrepreneur, but you haven't found that idea quite yet. Finally, it's terrible to fail, and failure is scary. So that's why I came up with an approach for myself that I ended up writing a book about and now have spoken about in more than 25 countries, and it's been translated into all these languages. 10% entrepreneurs basically spend at least 10% of their time, and if possible, 10% of their money investing in, advising, and starting entrepreneurial ventures while keeping their day jobs. And of course, then if things go well, you founded a company, you could go full-time, of course, but it's a great way to experience entrepreneurship in a low risk way. And it's a great way to then transition and increase. It doesn't sort of have to stop at 10%. Obviously, it can be much higher. It can go all the way to 100, 110. And so that is that's the concept behind the book. And with that, I will give you my contacts. And if you want to, anybody, I'll leave that up for a second, then I'll just come back into the screen. But feel free to reach out. As I said, I love hearing from you. And with that, I guess I'll turn it back to Susan. So Susan, do you want to moderate?
Yeah, always.
Great.
So
Awesome.
I think the last concept, as you started talking through the 10% entrepreneur, we have entrepreneurs here from all over the world, both on our Zoom here and through Facebook and YouTube. Hi, guys. And I think that concept is kind of the opposite to what everybody tells every entrepreneur, right? We're always told to focus, 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 no matter who we talk to. So how do you find that balance, and where do you start seeing the ability or to build the ability to understand the times you need to be super focused, the times you need to expand yourself? How do you reconcile those concepts?
Yes, I love that question. So I have a lot of thoughts, and let me give you a few of them. Number one is, I am not saying that you should not become a full-time entrepreneur if you want to do that. I support full-time entrepreneurs. I love full-time entrepreneurs. I have many friends who are full-time entrepreneurs, but not everybody has the courage. Not everybody knows how to do it. Not everybody can afford to do it, right? And so for a lot of people, if you look at I'm thinking in the US perspective, a lot of entrepreneurs come from families that can support them. And so it's great if your parents are saying, oh, don't worry about it, take a risk, and if you fail, we'll help you. But for somebody who doesn't have that sort of support, it can be very scary to put everything on the line. And so for everybody that is not able to do it full time, and there are many people out there, there has to be another way. And so that's where the 10% comes in. Now, let's talk about what that means from a practical perspective. So what it means is, first of all, it starts with 10%. It doesn't end with 10%. And in all of my work, and if you go to my website, I've written a bunch about this, so I won't sort of be able to get into the detail that I have over the years, but it is about figuring out ways to engage. So are you going to start a 10% entrepreneurial venture where, it's a model where you have to be sitting at a store 24 hours a day? No, of course not. If you have a full-time job, you can't do that. So you have to find a business model that works well online. Number two is it's very helpful to work with other people. That way you can team up. Number three is it's really a powerful way. Listen, for founders, it's a great way to test your MVP before quitting your job and trying to live off of it. And it's also a great way to see if there's initial traction and learn and make mistakes before you have to worry about raising capital, stuff like that. For people who do angel investing and advising, you can keep your job forever, but this is a great way for you to learn about entrepreneurship, to connect with entrepreneurs, to see if it's something you want to do. And finally, I think what's really a reality of this is, for many people, though, I'm not suggesting that somehow you can like raise venture capital around and be part-time. Of course not. Venture capitalists are going to expect you to commit all in, but guess what? You can also pay yourself a salary when you raise venture capital. And so, it's okay. But I see it as a wonderful way for all of us to engage with entrepreneurship in a way that is appropriate to us. And it offers all of us an opportunity to get started and then potentially go full-time later on. And in fact, many famous entrepreneurs, from Steve Jobs to Travis Kalanick, they all started their ventures as part-time ventures and then eventually went full-time.
And I think, the storyline of what you went through and wanting to find balance between de-risking your entire future. If you could go a little bit into detail on just making sure that you have a safety net, I think that's an important part of this, because the part-time entrepreneur piece isn't necessarily you just poke a toe in. You can still be 100% in one way, but you're diversifying your future in a lot of ways. Can you share that?
Totally. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, the story here is I had no plans of doing this. This was not like my life plan. Like most people, the only reason that I changed is because the world made me change, right? So we get comfortable in our patterns. I was doing private equity. I was flying all over the world, business class, working at a big corporation, and I thought to myself, I had friends who were doing angel investing or little projects. And I was like, why would you want to work when you're free time? It's so weird. It just wasn't something that I thought about. It. My head wasn't there. And then in 2008, my firm was part of AIG, my investment firm, and it blew up. And I had stock in the company that fell 97% in a week. And I realized that I was not diversified. And in fact, I was totally exposed to this company that was one of the largest companies in the world, but was now owned by the US government and bankrupt. It had been nationalized. And it was such a shock to me because I just never expected something like that to happen. And I realized I had chosen a very safe path. At least it looked very safe. But in fact, I had come out losing everything. And I thought to myself, I will never do this again. I will be diversified going forward. And I'm going to have, if I fail, it's going to be because I messed up. I want to be able to actually have a direct correlation between my hard work and the success or failure of a project, not just some people I've never met make some bad decisions and all of a sudden my company is worthless. So I started doing these projects. I now have more than 25 different things, from investments to advisory to starting things. I have 2 companies that went on to become unicorns. And what's been wonderful about this, and by the way, I have a lot of failures too. That's entrepreneurship. I mean, that's how we all know that's how it works. But what's wonderful about it is that, number one, I've learned so much and met so many people, and I keep doing the same projects with the same people now. But also, when this crisis hit, this is my 5th crisis since I graduated from college. And when this crisis hit, I've got this diversification. So I feel okay, to be honest, in a very hard time. And when this book came out, The 10% Entrepreneur, in 2016, I talk a lot about 2008 crisis and how it shaped my thinking. And so many people said to me, Patrick, you're so obsessed with 2008. Like, you just need to let go, man. You got to move on with your life. And I was like, yeah, I get it. I am obsessed, but like, this could happen again. No, it won't happen again. That's just once in a lifetime, man. Well, we are seeing now something even worse. And so that's why you must absolutely take responsibility, take control in your own hands, and build something that is for you, that is much more resilient, because we don't know where we're going anymore. And so this is a really good time to start changing the way we do things.
And I think for some of us, especially, we have so many people on the webinar who are an early stage company, and you're just, building your own personal brands. I think the beautiful thing to think about with this 10% entrepreneur concept is not, oh, I'm only going to do my one thing a little and then have a normal job. It could also mean I have my business, I'm working on it all the time, but as I build my personal brand, that could be in helping other companies in my industry, in my region, figure out how to partner together, distribution. Maybe I become an advisor to one of our distribution partners. Or one of the things that I love that we've been talking a lot about on these webinars, I may be looking to raise $100,000 to hire a dev shop to build my MVP, let's say. Wouldn't it be much more interesting to figure out how that dev shop becomes my partner? They get a little piece of equity. Potentially, I become their advisor on understanding the industry that I'm creating my brand around. And then all of a sudden, they're aligned 100% to my success. I'm aligned to their success because I'm sending work their way and I'm winning too. So it goes in a lot of different directions, guys. It's not about just try a little. It's about, as you build your brand and you think through strategically what your brand is going to be as an individual and as a company, how do you make sure, you know what? Most of our companies go through lots of ups and downs and then sometimes a major crash down. That doesn't mean that my 5 or 10 years of being devoted 100 hours a week to that company means that I have nothing to show for it, because over time, my brand and my time have also been spent building up other people. And hopefully I'm getting a piece of those things if I'm showing my value. Patrick, can you think through a little bit of some of the examples you've seen so that we can help people kind of think bigger than just, halfway entrepreneurship,
Yeah, I love it. I love what you just said, Susan. You're like, you're hitting a nail on the head. And let me give you my own personal example. This is what happens when I've been doing it now for, I guess, 8 years. And so I can see in the laboratory of my own experience what happened. So I remember in 2012, I got started on this and I didn't know what to do. And I was introduced to a guy called Ariel Arrieta, who many of you know, I'm sure if you're in Latin America, who was starting this thing called NXTP Labs. And I was really interested. It was an accelerator for Latin America. So I said, listen, I want to get involved and I want to invest, but the amount you want me to invest is too much for me. Let me give you half of that and I'm going to help you get other investors. And so I did. So I invested, I got some shares in it as well. And that has gone on to become like a major player in Latin America. It's a venture capital firm, an accelerator. And they started sending me some of the companies that were coming out of the accelerator. And so I met this guy called Diego Saez-Gil. Diego started this company called We Hostels. I ended up investing a little bit in there too. He introduced me to a guy named Alex Torrenegra, who was the CTO at the time. Alex made me an advisor to his company. He gave me some stock in the company. It's like 2013. Okay. Diego's business got sold. I got my money back and, did well on it. I ended up investing in his next company and becoming an advisor there because we'd gotten so close. And then Alex, meanwhile, goes off and builds a very big company that I have shares in from 8 years ago. And now I'm like, oh my God, like these shares are really valuable. And I'm also looking maybe at investing in it. So the point is that like you create these relationships with people. Alex is now on Shark Tank Latin America. He's like he's all over the place. People who you just like and respect and want to work with, and you never know what's going to happen. And so if you build those kinds of relationships, not only do you meet great people, but also as they succeed, people remember the value you've created. They know what you're good at and they're always introducing you to people. So I've been doing those kinds of things over and over and over again. And you see, that's very typical in entrepreneurship. And so I would just encourage you to find great people, find ways to work with them. And your point, Susan, also about like maybe a dev shop, like entrepreneurs, one of the things we have to deal with is scarce resources. We can't afford to pay for everything. I mean, and so why don't you be creative about using your shares to offer to people, for example, as advisors or for services, because you have shares. That's one thing you can give away. And as much as we like to think in an early stage, our companies are so valuable. In fact, at that point, your company is worth very little. So, that the best thing you can do is find a way to use your shares to buy things. And then as they grow, everybody benefits together.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes back to knowing your values as a founder, what your company stands for, and finding like-minded people, because all of us are kind of on this journey where we don't know who's going to win and who's going to lose. But if we're surrounded by people we trust and we like, and we can learn different things from and collaborate with, eventually somebody's going to do well. And even if your business doesn't, you can be part of that next big things. And sometimes that's where you learn the most, not being the leader, but being the follower. Okay, we have lots of questions. Sorry, Patrick. Okay. Dear Patrick, do you usually trust your gut feeling? Do you follow your intuition before making decisions?
Great question. So here's the thing. I do, but the problem when we have FOMO and FOBO is that my view is the intuition is something we should trust, but that FOBO and FOMO and things like that cloud our intuition, and we inject a lot of fear, which means that we can't make decisions based on facts and logic. And so the work that I do is to remove the fear and the emotion so that I can let the facts and logic make sense. And then I can trust in my intuition.
So how do you build up your intuition though? I know it's like a lifelong process, but can you walk us through things we can do to start trusting ourselves more and get to those quick decisions?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. Number one is on the big decisions that we talked about earlier, there's you have to accept that there is risk to every decision and that you may get it wrong. But why I encourage people to write it down is because we can then go back and learn from what we did and look at the decision-making process that we had and say, okay, what did I get it right? Where did I get it wrong? How can I improve? Decision-making, like playing the piano, is something that the more you practice, the better you get at it. I also think it's really important to get consultations with others. Like, go to people who you respect, who you think are decisive, who are wise, and get feedback from them. That's really important. Now, when it comes to the little things, this is a little hack for you. I want to offer you a hack. This is in my video, the TED video, How to Make Faster Decisions. We spend a lot of time on things that don't matter. So in our lives, I refer to, there's three types of decisions. There's high stakes decisions, low stakes decisions, and no stakes decisions. High stakes decisions we talked about, things that matter, things that have like real implications in financially or in our time and money in our lives. Low stakes are things that we will not remember deciding in a month or two. And no stakes are things we won't remember in a couple of days, like what am I having for lunch, chicken or fish? And so with the no stakes decisions, what I do is I outsource them to my watch. I don't have a watch on, so I'll use my phone. I say chicken or fish. If the time on my phone is odd, I'm taking the chicken. If it's even, I'm taking the fish. I look at it. It looks like it's 51 past the hour. Chicken, done, moving on. Why? Because either one is fine. And in fact, if I really truly cared, I would have just chosen one. But I'm not able to decide. I'm injecting emotion into it. I'm not allowing my intuition to do its work. So I'm letting somebody else do its work, the universe. I do the same thing with like low stakes would be, which hotel should I stay at or which printer should we buy for the office? Instead of just flipping a coin on that, I outsource to people because I need a little thought involved. I need somebody to I need to set some criteria and say, please find me a hotel that's less than $300 a night, that's safe, that is in a nice area. I don't want to do all the research and work. So I outsource that to somebody else. And then they come back with a recommendation and we go with it. So that's a really great way to make quick decisions so that number one, we don't procrastinate and avoid the important decisions. And number two, we save our energy for the things that really matter.
We have a question coming in from YouTube. Is FOMO a permanent psychological phenomenon?
I like that question. I never got that question before. Thank you for it. Yes, I think it is. And I'll tell you why. It's biologically, listen, I think if you become like a Buddhist monk and you are able to be permanently detached, because a lot of what overcoming FOMO is, it's deciding what we want, but letting go of the rest. And so mindfulness and meditation can really help with that. But the human condition is one in which FOMO exists. Our earliest ancestors did, and our children will as well. And as we've seen with this pandemic, even when you're stuck inside your house, you still have lots of feelings of FOMO. So I think it is part of, in the same way that humans are competitive, in the same way that humans are emotional, that they feel feelings, that feel love and shame and all this sort of stuff. FOMO is just part of that group of feelings that that are part of what it means to be alive. And so that's why it's important to reckon with them, understand them, use them for good, and then make sure that they don't control you.
So as you travel the world, meeting with entrepreneurs and sharing this mindset and how to overcome it, what kind of cultural challenges have you come up against that may affect the way people understand and overcome it for themselves?
Great question. And there's a really interesting research that I found and I included in the book around the cultural aspects of FOMO, because when you live in an individualistic society like America, where it's like, our whole thing is like, well, everybody should do what they want to do. Okay. You know how it is. I mean, it has its upsides and its downsides. And then you go to a place that's much more collectivist, where people are much more thinking about how their actions impact others. So how does that play out? Well, let's think about the current crisis. Okay. This COVID situation, like, because America is so individualistic, you have a lot of people who don't want to adhere to social distancing. They don't want to wear a mask and all sort of stuff. And that directly, not only does it affect their neighbors, but it could create like much more damage in terms of our economy. It's very, it's a very tricky thing. You think about Taiwan, which has a very high density, and they basically haven't had a case in a month because people were adhering there. It's a collective society. The way that people make decisions is different. So that's one really good example of how this goes down. I'd also say in terms of FOMO, like in collectivist societies, oftentimes you have a situation where in the US, like being an entrepreneur and saying, you know what, I have FOMO, I'm going to run after this thing and go for it, is considered like a virtue. In some other places, it's considered irresponsible, or that you need to take care of your parents. And so the pressures that we have in terms of, the external pressures on our decisions, whether it's, encouragement or shame or fear, those are different based on what our cultures value.
And what kind of, I know you did a ton of research for this new book. What were the most surprising things you uncovered that you weren't expecting as you went through and really looked for the data to back up the storyline here?
Yeah, I did a ton of research, and I did both sort of quantitative and qualitative. So in the quantitative research, it's a shocking amount of research out there on this topic. Like how many journal articles have been written about FOMO. I was amazed, and they're really interesting. Like it's fascinating. And then on the qualitative side, I interviewed like biologists and Buddhist monks and Catholic priests and all these other and business people, and just a mix of psychologists. And I think what was so fascinating, and we look at the data around this, is that FOMO, the tie between FOMO and digital sort of use of digital devices is extraordinary. Also, the tie between the age of the participant and how FOMO changes throughout our lives, and how different people of different ages live with FOMO, and how that affects their mood and their behavior and their self-perception. The data around that was really interesting. So it's a very widespread principle, but obviously we feel it in different parts in our lives in different ways. And so delving into that and looking at like hard data, I thought that was fascinating.
So from your investor hat, if you put your investor hat on and you think about what are the most important features when you're diligencing an entrepreneur, a team, a company, give us a rundown of what exactly you're looking for, and what the sweet spot is that makes you feel really comfortable in saying, yes, this is a good fit for me.
Yeah, I like that question a lot, because I think that number one is that every investor is a little different. So it's really valuable for all of you to like ask investors what's important to them. I mean, there are some general things that everybody looks for, but everybody's different. The obvious ones that everybody looks for are like, size of market. Can we scale this business? Can it be, reasonably, grow reasonably large and stuff like that. Now, I think there's a lot of bull in that I think a lot of people, and for those of you who pitch to VCs, a lot of VCs like to say, no, thank you. They like to pass on an opportunity because they say the market's not big enough. I think it's just an excuse, to be honest. It's a nice way of saying no. Most markets are big enough unless it's like something super, super, super nichey. I mean, if you do a good job, you can build a real business. So I don't think you need $1 billion market opportunity necessarily, especially in emerging markets. It's just not practical. Number two, everybody says management. Obviously, you need management. Sure. Obvious point. You want quality management, but let's dig deeper. Okay. Here's what really matters to me. I want to know that you are the management team that is running this business is doing so because it has a fundamentally clear advantage in creating this kind of business. Like, it has experience in the past that is relevant, has the right industry context, and knows the mistakes that it's going to make and how to avoid them. It has, the classic unfair advantage. So if you come to me with a business and you've worked in that industry and you have experience and contacts, like, that's very attractive. Now, sometimes, and I remember I was in Jordan one time, and there was a very successful company that said, well, we were total outsiders and that's why we're better, because we didn't think like everybody else. Okay, that can happen. But number one is, if you're an outsider, how do you even know that you're right about that? And number two is, that is generally, it can happen. But if you're looking at sort of the overall stats, people who have more knowledge are just obviously going to have a better shot than people who have less knowledge. So that's number one. Number two, I'm really laser focused on product market fit. That's the big thing, product market fit. And that means, understanding why the consumer wants your product, and then understanding, can we even make this profitably? So if you can't tell me what your CAC is and what your LTV is, and explain to me why, you can acquire customers profitably over time so that you can build this business into something interesting, that's fundamental. And what's funny is I'm very involved in Endeavor. So Endeavor is an organization that many of you may know, and I'm a judge. And I've been surprised. I mean, these are great entrepreneurs, by the way, no slouches there, but I've always been amazed that there's sometimes you have an entrepreneur who shows up and can't quite give you the numbers, even though they've been prepared, and you're like, oh my God. And so, that always is kind of difficult. You sort of like, oh my goodness. And it's rare with Endeavor, but I've been, how many pitches I've seen in my life where the entrepreneur couldn't tell me those numbers is much higher than it should be. So really know those basic figures. That inspires confidence as well.
Well, let's spend a minute on that. So what are the 4, 5, 6 ratios or numbers that really help define understanding where they are and where they're going?
Yep, that's important. So one thing that's really important to me is an understanding of the marketplace, of the landscape. So if you can't tell me, like, if this drives me bonkers. Like, if you show me your competitive landscape and I know somebody who's on it, that's a real company, and you haven't included them, I'm just like, where have you been? I've seen this a million times. I'm like, tell me, like, where's this company? Oh yeah, okay, we should have put them on. Oh, really? Like, so that's number one, is understanding deeply who the competitors are, and trying to get a sense of their sort of like what their relative market share is, and their sort of competitive advantages vis-a-vis your product. That's big, because that shows that you've done your homework. Number two, come in and be able to show me like some initial traction. I mean, it depends on the stage, right? If it's just a PowerPoint, obviously you can't, but let's assume you're kind of coming in for a series seed or A, some initial traction, how customers are interacting with your product, what their sort of satisfaction levels are, how they're rating you. 3, understanding what it's going to cost to get customers on board and being able to get into it with me, in terms of what kind of marketing you're doing and why. Number 4, understanding what you think the potential lifetime value of that customer could be. And then finally, understanding, okay, given the market size, we're going to estimate market size. Like, what do we think is a reasonable sort of growth of this company? What could it look like in 5 years or 10 years? And so I think that's all really basic stuff like everybody would ask for, but I am amazed at how oftentimes you get 2 out of the 5, but not all 5.
We have another question. What books would you recommend for entrepreneurs of different stages to think through how to make the most of themselves and their businesses?
Yeah. Okay. So I like to do these talks next to all my books, because then I can just tell you what I like. So obviously my books, number 1, but then I love a book called Hooked by Nir Eyal. If anybody knows Nir is a dear friend of mine. He's been on my podcast twice, so you can hear him talk about his books. Hooked is a book about how to create habit-forming products. It's about the psychology of product creation and management. It's an awesome book. And it's just basically thinking through how you can create products that people want to use. So I think that's a really good one. I also really love The Lean Startup. I think that book's paradigm shifting and amazing. And then here's my other recommendation for today, which I have out because I knew I was going to recommend it. if somebody asked, is The Happiness Advantage. It's a book about how we can emulate successful people in order to be more successful ourselves. It's written by the guy who taught the happiness class at Harvard. It's a positive psychology book. I'd never read this kind of stuff, and I read it and I was like, this is amazing. I love it. And so I recommend Sean Acor's book, The Happiness Advantage, especially right now because times are tough. And so we need to find ways to come out ahead and actually grow from this challenge and not sort of stay in one place or stagnate.
What do you wish entrepreneurs asked you when you first meet with them?
That's a great question. Okay, so I'm sure some of you have heard of this, but I'm going to drop this. If you remember nothing from today, please remember this. When you ask for money, you get advice. When you ask for advice, you get money.
I say that literally almost every freaking webinar for these poor people. So I'm glad I'm not the only one. Now, why do you think that is? Like, let's again, investor hat on. Why is it so likely that you automatically are turned off by someone with a handout saying, I want your money?
Yeah, it's okay. Here's how it, so there's a psychological element to it. And then there's just a practicality element to it. So the amount of people who send me a LinkedIn message, they're like, here's my company. Will you invest in me? And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. Like, where are you? Like, what? You got cannabis company in like Lithuania? Like, what? You know, I get a little annoyed. I'm just like, oh my God. I get 5 of those a day minimum. And by the way, I don't mean to be mean, but it's just like, it'd be like if you walked up to somebody on the street in a bar and you're like, hey, want to make out with me? It's like, you know, I just met you. I'm not going to kiss you yet. In Brazil, that would be socially acceptable, but no, I'm just kidding. Anyway, sorry. You want to build a relationship before you start asking people to invest in your company, because what happens when you ask somebody for money is they pull back. You put them on the spot. And if they know nothing about you, there's very little chance they're just going to say, I want to invest in your company, unless they've got terrible FOMO, in which case you don't want them anyway. So the idea here is to build a relationship. So what I value I only invest in companies where I've gotten to know the people over time. Usually, I mean, that's kind of like basic for me. And I think I love the question. I would say, ask me, number one, what's important to me as an investor. Ask me advice. And, you don't have to take my advice, because a lot of people give you advice that's crappy and you can just dismiss it, but hear from me. And number 3, and I think this is the most important of all, ask me why I think why I could be a good investor in your company. What is it? Because like, you don't want me just my money. If you want just my money, like, that's not interesting. I want to be involved. I want you to value me. And so that is really important, because if you don't see a fit between me and you just want my money, I got other things to be doing.
I'm so happy that we can end on a point like that, because honestly, guys, investors, there's a lot of people with money out there, but the opportunity to align someone to your mission and vision, utilize their network, learn from them, have them be another way for you to bounce ideas back and forth. It's just such an incredible thing. And it's the difference between that investor with money who may eventually vote you out because he or she didn't just see eye to eye with you on whatever issue, versus a mentor, guide, support system to help you grow, because you need to grow faster than your business does, right? So Patrick, I just want to thank you again for finding the time today. This was a wonderful conversation. Guys, we'll be sending you all of those links to all of the topics he talked about, his TED Talk, the website, the podcast, etc. And Patrick, hopefully this will be the first of many times we get to spend time together.
Yeah, I hope so. It was really great seeing everybody today. I'm sorry I can't see you in person, but the great thing about this whole challenge has been that everything's moved online. So we're all connecting in ways that we didn't before. And I'm certainly thankful that you connected with me today.
Well, I'm sure it'll be the first of many. Stay safe, and thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
So guys, there are a lot of questions on the chat and in the QA around Global Pool and some of the other pieces that have been coming up. So Matthew, Carlos, I'd love if you can turn your cameras on. I'd love to kind of group analyze some of these questions because they follow a few different, very specific threads. Number one, global pool. Let's go through this again. Right now, there are 52 countries that have been announced as the global pool list, and those are up both in the discussion board, it's up in the chat, you can find it in lots of places. And you should have at this point gotten an email if you are in one of those countries. A lot of the texts I'm seeing in this chat are from India, Canada, Nigeria, Pakistan, big countries where you're definitely having a national competition. So let's unpack this a little bit. There are two tracks here. If there's a national organizer doing a national competition, he or she will notify you, but you can reach out to them directly in the Slack group under the country. So they've set it up really nicely, really simply. In your Slack group is a country group, and you can ping the organizer of that Slack channel of your country and say, hey, what's going on, peeps? When's the competition? What's happening? Do that. Otherwise, you would have gotten an email saying you were in the first group of Global Pool. We will be doing another email either late this week or early next week with the next group of Global Pool countries. But by June 1st, everyone will know if you have a national organizer or Global Pool. If you are in Global Pool, you're going to have to spend a couple hours doing a couple of extra documents because that's how we're going to analyze if you should make it to the global finals. And those are already posted in the platform. So if you go into EWC Accelerates, depending on what stage you're in, you will see the additional 1, 2, or 3 deliverables depending on what group you're in. I would suggest you do them anyway, just because it's good practice and it's stuff that will help you be more competitive even if you're in a national competition. Those of you who are in national competitions, because you have a national organizer running a series of pitch events in your country, you're going to do several pitches, man. You're going to be doing potentially 2 or 3 regional competitions going up to a national competition. So global pool people will actually likely spend less time, but you will have to get the work done sooner because we have a lot of people to review to make sure what could be 100 countries of applications are reviewed. We are going to look at every single application, period. Okay? All of them. And we're going to make sure the people who are willing to do the work and can show that they're going for it get into those global finals. That's it. That's our promise. So Matthew, Carlos, what are the other questions that are coming up that you're seeing on the discussion board in the chat here that we want to make sure to address?
Question came in asking, can you change your application?
I think that is a question for the EWC platform help. I know that they have worked on that, and that might be something a feature that they've already put in. And if not, they will be able to answer that. So the EWC platform has an amazing technical QA team that will be able to answer that directly. I do not have the answer to that. They do. We're your program people, as you can tell by our fantastic emceeing skills. What else is being asked?
There was a couple of other questions regarding FOMO, but we can channel those for Patrick later. Okay. Someone was talking about how there's like a business idea that they have that was submitted as like the main part of the application, but there's other sort of like ideas or offshoots of like either things that are already being commercialized or whatever. Basically, like it's a very stacked like business strategy for, you know, trying to combine several ideas to make something sell better or work better. So how should they address that in an application?
Sure. I think that's a great question because a lot of us have ideas that we're working on, even early stage companies where you may have started with one product and then there might be additional features that may feel like a new product offering. So the wonderful thing about this application process, you're not writing some answers to fill in just a simple application. We've also included a pitch deck and you're pitching. So I want you guys to really spend some time on the EWC Accelerate platform, where we have content around what goes into a good pitch, how to explain the market, how to explain the user, the product market fit, the real opportunity around the problem you're solving, and kind of most importantly, the data you're collecting to show that that actually meets their needs. So all of those together help you tell that story. And it may be after you review some of that material that its features 1 and 5 are the ones you should be talking about, because that's what 80% of the customers you talk to said, that solves my problem. And that I'm willing to pay extra for. Sometimes as entrepreneurs, we have these Frankenstein products. I mean, the software that our team built, that Matthew's one of the product owners on, it's huge. But when we start talking to a potential customer about it, we hone in really closely on the 1 or 2 or 3 things that they really need. And it's definitely been my problem sometimes where I want to talk about my baby and every single aspect of it. But in reality, they only give a crap about 2 or 3 of the things. So it's very important for us to kind of take a step back when you're doing your application, when you're doing your pitch deck, and definitely when you're making that pitch. What are the things that help you tell the story that it actually is solving a very specific customer problem? And how have you validated that? What research do you have? What data do you have? It's not about your idea and what you love. It's about solving a customer problem. So I think to answer the question more directly, take a step back, talk to a customer. What does the customer care about? What data can you get to like quote the customer in your deck so that you can make sure you're telling a story of a paying customer's problem being solved versus your baby and how much you love it and how excited you are to be this inventor. That's the difference between a successful application and one that could be a really cool, unique thing, but never get to customers because you just didn't ever tell the story right. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions, guys, that will be helpful to address right now? Yes, Matthew.
Abir, that was for Abir Mozumdar. That question was from Abir.
Great.
Okay,
Countries that have, oh yeah, go ahead. Let's do
So,
a couple more.
Yep, for those of us from countries that will have a national competition, should we also submit our deliverables on or before June 1st?
So you won't, if you have a national competition, you don't have to submit your Accelerate One deliverables. Those are only mandatory for global pool country competitors. If you choose to submit them, that'll be awesome for the national competition hosts, because that person running your competition will have another data set to look at in terms of understanding that you're serious, that you have a good fit, and quite frankly, it might help you stand out a little more. I think that for many of you, your national organizers may be requesting, you know, maybe an updated pitch deck. They may ask for some additional data to be delivered. So check with them. Guys, they're there for you. All of us are here to help you succeed. So your national organizers are the representative for EWC in your country. They will be happy to hear from you. Reach out to them on Slack. Let them know if you have questions. But I will also follow up with the person overseeing all the national organizers and make sure that they submit and give you that kind of information soon. So at least you know timelines. But I mean, the national organizers are getting ready for something they've never done before. Some of them are building out completely virtual competitions and they've never done it before. So be patient with them. We all want this to be a successful program, but this is new for a lot of us. You know, my team's lucky because we do this stuff virtual and hybrid all day long. But we're all in this together to make sure that your country program is a success. And then if you come up to the global finalist pool, we're going to give you an experience none of us have ever done before. Something of this magnitude hasn't been done. So we're really excited to be on the journey with you. Other questions or things to think about?
The last point you already addressed right now, which was about contacting national organizers. So,
oh, you know what? Matthew just put something interesting. I think a pitch deck and a video deck are a combination of decks. Okay. The pitch deck is the actual slides, your PowerPoint, PDF, whatever. The video is you presenting it. So I've seen some awesome decks that are beautiful and have lovely things going on and not a lot of text, and I get it. And then when the person presents, I'm like, oh, I don't think that person's going to execute, right? So I've also seen the opposite, where the deck is super boring and it's like no colors and, you know, just white on black. But then the presenter makes you want to like get up and cheer. And how do I help you succeed? We want a combination, guys. We want a deck that can stand on its own, telling your story, not a lot of text, you know, enough so that we can follow along, problem, solution, market, exactly what's in the video on EWC Accelerates to help you build a good deck. But when you get up there and you're presenting and telling us your story, we need to believe in you. We need to believe in you and your team that you can execute on these things. So that's why they're both there together. The deck lets us like look at it slide by slide, spend a little bit more time reading it, understanding some nuances. Whereas you presenting it, we need to believe in you. So it's that combination. That's what both of them are. All right. Now, every other Saturday, we're doing these sessions. This Saturday, we have Wally, the founder of Web Congress, talking about internationalizing your digital strategy. He is a dear friend of ours. He's lived in Morocco, France, Colombia, US, just an amazing storyteller and one of the top digital marketing firms, running the top digital marketing conference in the world. And he'll be sharing his best practices with us Saturday for our every other week Saturday session. And on Tuesday next week, we have a dear, dear friend who is an expert in Middle Eastern investing. He's based in DC, Chris Schroeder, who actually wrote the definitive book on the growth of the Middle Eastern startup ecosystem. So the next couple of sessions are going to be really, really good. We hope you can join. And just as a last comment, the deck is in the video. Yeah. So you can either make your own little Zoom meeting and show the deck with you like this, or you can actually have your presentation just on your phone. We're not talking about professional video here. It really comes down to you just telling us your story. Some people just send us a video of them without showing the deck. That's fine too. It doesn't have to be the full deck. Don't go overboard on making some professional video. Show us your passion. Show us your ability to present yourself and your idea well. Because if you make it to the stage in Riyadh, you're going to be up in front of a global audience. And we want to make sure you're representing the opportunity, not just for you and your company, but you're representing your country. You're representing customers. We want to make sure you can do it, right? So with that, guys, have a wonderful week. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you this Saturday and next Tuesday for the next group of sessions. And again, any other questions you have the EWC help on the platform. You have the discussion board within EWC Accelerates. And there's so much content there, guys. You will be shocked. Any question you have the resources there to help you, and we're cheering you on. Have a great day. Stay safe. Talk soon, guys. Bye. Thank you.